The Disney company had been in kind of a funk since Walt died in 1966, but they finally had a certified hit on their hands with 1988's Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That movie had a long journey of its own, dating all the way back to 1981. As always, we'll be covering its history with the biggest focus on its villains, the Weasley Toon Patrol and their leader, Judge Doom. You may remember that my emphasis has always been on animated villains, so why am I covering the live-action Doom? Well, I don't feel too worried about spoiling this movie given its age. Doom is, in fact, a toon in disguise. And you know what? I'm using that as a technicality. How could I not give the evil judge the attention he deserves? Like my Black Cauldron video, I'd like to direct you to a video by YESTERWORLD Entertainment, who covered the movie's development in great detail. I'll definitely be cribbing from that documentary at a few points, but I'd recommend you watch it in full when you get the chance. Who Censored Roger Rabbit, written by Gary K. Wolfe, takes place in a world where humans and cartoon characters live side by side. Toons, largely viewed as second-class citizens, are chiefly represented in comic strips rather than theatrical shorts. They even have word bubbles appear above them when they speak. Private Detective Eddie Valiant is on a routine case involving a contract dispute between the Degreasy Comics Syndicate and one of their supporting actors, Roger Rabbit. Things get complicated when Roger is found shot. Around the same time, the head of the syndicate, Rocco Degreasy, is found in the same manner. The police assume Roger killed Rocco and was in turn killed by his estranged wife, Jessica. In this world, Toons can mentally create a doppelganger to do dangerous stunts that would normally kill them. Roger created a doppel shortly before his death, and the fake Roger helps Eddie clear his name and find out who killed him. He refuses to believe his wife could ever do something so cruel, even though very few people have a high opinion of Jessica. Doppels don't last long, so time's of the essence. Along the way, the detective duo encounters a number of colorful characters, including Roger's co-star, Baby Herman, and Rocco's brother, Dominic Degreasy. It's a very clever book, full of surreal moments and surprises. I don't want to give too much away in this video, because it's very different from the movie. Judge Doom and the Weasels are not in the story at all, so I don't feel the need to go over it in too much detail. Instead, I'll recommend that you all read it yourself. Even though these aren't necessarily the Roger and Jessica we've come to know and love, it's a great story. The rights to Roger Rabbit were bought by Disney before the book was even published. There was major potential in a story like this, but it would need to be properly developed as a movie. The plot took a good while to fall into place, with multiple storylines being considered. In the earliest drafts, Jessica was actually the one who framed Roger Rabbit, and was only using him to further her career. Test animation of this Jessica had her voice provided by Russi Taylor.
You will take my case, won't you?
Not a chance.
What do you mean, not a chance?
The early Jessica was attractive, but the final version knocked it out of the park, with many people considering her to be the ultimate animated sex symbol. Unlike the book and the early drafts, Jessica is just as devoted to Roger as he is to her. Wish fulfillment for all the Rogers out there? Well, yes, but it's also quite touching and much funnier than having her be a conniving gold digger. She's not bad, she's just drawn that way. At another point in production, they considered having Baby Herman be the real villain. Finally, they developed an original bad guy for the story, the terrifying Judge Doom and his weasel enforcers. Tim Curry auditioned for the role, but was considered too scary. Conversely, John Cleese wasn't scary enough. Eventually, they cast Christopher Lloyd in the part. Lloyd, who had recently worked with the film's director, Robert Zemeckis, on Back to the Future, was now playing someone very different from the lovable, eccentric Doc Brown. One of the most interesting things about Doom that never made the cut was his true identity. I talked about this in my Bambi video a few years ago, but I should recap it again. In the final movie, although we find out that Judge Doom is a Toon, we never find out who that Toon was. Our only hints are his piercing red eyes and high-pitched voice. In an early draft of the script, Eddie explains that Doom was Man, the guy who killed Bambi's mom. Roger expresses displeasure, saying that even the other Toons never liked that guy. Eddie agrees, but decided to take his case anyway when the hunter was accused of robbing a bank. It turned out he was guilty, and killed Eddie's brother, Teddy, while making an escape. In the same script, when Doom is revealed to be a Toon, he's described as having a Toon mouth under his mask, and red hands with long fingernails. While the idea of having a character as infamous as the Bambi Hunter also be Judge Doom was funny in theory, I think it was a smart move to keep him shrouded in mystery. It makes him scarier and less gimmicky. The movie as a whole could have been just one big gimmick, but it rose above that by taking itself seriously. At least, when it absolutely had to. Even before he reveals his big secret, Judge Doom never seems quite human. Tall, imposing, ruthless, he has so many exaggerated qualities that he appropriately comes across as a live-action cartoon. To further this, Doom never blinks at any point, since his eyes are fake. I've heard one account say that this was in the script's instructions, and another that it was Lloyd's idea. For what it's worth, this is not noted in the draft of the script available online. Either way, even if you don't consciously notice it when watching the movie, it's a brilliant bit of character acting. This horrifying figure makes Toons and humans alike shudder in his presence. It seems crazy that Toons could ever elect someone so cruel and humorless as their judge, but Doom apparently managed to bribe his way into office. Knowing what we know by the end, it sort of makes sense. Doom knows firsthand how Toons think, even if he's warped by his own screwy standards. If anyone could manipulate them, it would be him. Unfortunately, now the Toons are stuck with someone who has full jurisdiction to condemn whoever he sees fit. Truly, there's no justice for Toons anymore. Just like in the original book, animated individuals are not viewed as real people, so no one really cares what happens to them. They're good for a laugh, and that's about it. It doesn't matter that they're at the mercy of this hanging judge. Did I say hanging? I meant dipping. Up until now, there had been no way to permanently kill a Toon. It makes me wonder if Toon overpopulation could ever become a thing, but that's beside the point. Doom has invented a chemical solution called dip, his own final solution, a mix of paint thinners that painfully dissolves its victims. A memorable scene has Doom demonstrate this by dipping a cute, innocent cartoon shoe. In the screenplay, his victim was a gopher who accidentally bumps into him. Doom charges him with vagrancy, assault, and when he tries to run, resisting arrest. The gopher gets the same fate, pleading for his life the whole time. The shoe scene is even more affecting. It's tighter paced for one thing, but the shoe is especially childlike and makes such pitiful squeaking sounds. If it wasn't obvious enough Doom was the villain from the first time we see him, this clinches it. It's not a surprise that Doom is the one who killed Marvin Acme and framed Roger. The real mystery to solve is why. Throughout the movie, we hear about the mysterious Cloverleaf Industries that has been slowly taking over LA. Toontown is set to be bought and destroyed if Acme's will is not found by a certain time. That's the only thing proving he's leaving Toontown to the Toons. Doom is the face behind the faceless corporation and plans to replace Toontown with a freeway. His mad, reverent speech about the glory that a freeway will bring is probably one of the finest bits of acting in the movie, which is really saying something.
My God, it'll be beautiful.
The idea of a Toon killing a human is unheard of. Toons, by nature, are zany pranksters at worst. When Roger is accused of killing Acme, it's huge news. Earlier, the patrons at the bar go silent with shock when they're told that a Toon killed Eddie's brother, Teddy. Roger is equally taken aback when Eddie shares his tragic story. The world of Roger Rabbit is a fantastic one, but even here, certain things simply do not happen. Eddie has been a wreck ever since. Although Roger plays a big role in the story, the conflict ultimately comes down to Doom versus Valiant. Doom is the one who robbed Eddie of his brother, his sobriety, and his sense of humor. Roger is just a poor, hapless rabbit caught up in something much bigger than him. A scene from the graphic novel version of the movie, which may have been in the screenplay at one point, has Eddie hesitating outside the entrance to Toontown. Aside from a deleted scene where the weasels rough him up, more on that later, he hasn't been there since his brother died. In the shadows, he hallucinates that Jessica's taillights become the enormous red eyes of the Toon that killed Teddy. Throwing a flask at them, he vows to do his job and save Roger. The movie has a similar scene where he shoots his flask instead, but I like that this tied into the mental hold Doom has over him. As scary as Judge Doom is for most of the movie, nothing can top that final fight. Doom gets the upper hand on Eddie and tries to run him over with a steamroller. That right there is already a Toon move. He could have shot or stabbed Eddie easily, but he had to go for the overkill, just like when he dropped a piano on Teddy. He ends up getting flattened himself, but that's not the end. The flat Doom flops up and reinflates himself. His fake eyes pop out, revealing piercing red animated ones underneath. And although I praised his freeway monologue earlier, nothing can top this delivery.
Remember me, Eddie?
When I killed your brother, I talked. Just wait.
This could have easily come across as silly, but it ends up being quite terrifying. Part of this is amplified if you saw the movie when you were young. For many of us born at a certain age, Toon Doom sits in the nightmare-fueled pantheon alongside Large Marge and the Skeksis. With those eyes and that voice, the character has transformed into a cadaverous clown. Even worse, he can now freely show off his magical weaponized hands. Now that his secret's out, we know he's not going to go down so easily. Luckily for everyone, except Doom himself, Eddie is able to use the judge's own dip against him, giving him a fitting death. Screeching, Doom melts in a clear homage to the Wicked Witch of the West. All that's left is his creepy human suit, with his fellow Toons wondering who he really was. The music in Who Framed Roger Rabbit was composed by Alan Silvestri, a frequent collaborator with Robert Zemeckis. Silvestri gave Doom a dark, brooding theme that emphasizes the judge's harsh, joyless nature. Near the end, as the judge's plans are fully revealed, Silvestri introduces a new, creepy theme. All this time, and I've barely mentioned Doom's sidekicks. As crafty as he is, Doom can't carry out his wicked plan alone. He has 5 sneaky weasels working for him, the dreaded Toon Patrol. They're willing to do his dirty work, and have no problem wiping out their own kind. Roger Rabbit is full of fun cameos from classic cartoon characters. The weasels are modeled after the ones found in The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Since then, the character design has become a staple of the Mickey Mouse universe. I went into more detail about those versions in my Mr. Toad video, but I knew the Toon Patrol needed special coverage alongside their boss. In the original screenplay, the Toon Patrol was written as a group of nondescript weasels. As the movie developed, they became 5 distinct characters. The first one to apparently get developed was their leader. Concept art shows a group of similar, and especially noodle-like weasels with a very short, well-dressed boss. That boss character was scaled up a bit and given the name Smartass, voiced by David L. Lander. Despite this only being revealed in the credits, as are the other 4 weasels, Disney didn't seem comfortable with one of their characters having that kind of name. In future appearances, he's been called a number of things, including Smarty, Smart Guy, and Wise Guy. He often misuses or mispronounces words. This, coupled with his flashy manner of dress, makes him come across as a lowly thug desperately trying to appear sophisticated. Being the head weasel, he gets the most dialogue of the bunch.
We got a reliable tip-off. The rabbit was here and was corrugated by several others. Forget the bullshit.
Greasy and Psycho were both voiced by Charles Fleischer, who notably also voiced Roger Rabbit himself and Benny the Cab. Greasy, with his Latin accent, gets the second most exposure. He's an even fancier dresser than his boss, and seems like he has a decent head on his shoulders. At least as far as cartoon weasels are concerned. He gets one of the movie's best gags when he sets off Jessica's booby trap. Psycho really stands out from the crowd with his wild hair and straitjacket. Just like the others, he fully lives up to his name, and happily brandishes a straight razor for most of his screen time. Wheezy, voiced by June Foray, is the quietest weasel. By that, I mean he probably has the least to say, with his dialogue being very easy to miss. What's not quiet is his coughing and wheezing, thanks to his comically excessive chain-smoking. Finally, there's Stupid, voiced by Fred Newman. He's the largest weasel, and dresses in children's clothing that's a few sizes too small. Armed with a club, it appears the gang keeps him around for his strength, not his brains. They already don't have much of that to go around. They're terrible drivers too, but it makes for some entertaining chase scenes. While I've harped on the obvious, the weasel's lack of smarts, that doesn't mean they should be underestimated. Judge Doom knows what he's doing. The underhanded weasels are good at sniffing out their targets, and gleefully violent. Eddie is able to make quick work of them when he catches them off guard, but there's power in numbers, and the weasels often get the upper hand. Smartass also puts up a pretty decent, if brief, fight in the bar scene. Then there's a well-known deleted sequence where the weasels take Eddie to Toontown and torture him. Most of it is left to our imagination, but their final blow is to give Eddie a painted cartoon pig's head. The weasels do have one major weakness, and it's not dip. That doesn't count because it's every Toon's weakness. When they see something funny, usually someone else in pain, they burst into uncontrollable laughter. Smartass is the only one who can sometimes hold it together, but even he usually succumbs pretty quickly. According to Doom, their cousins, some hyenas, actually died laughing. This gives Eddie an idea near the end. Now to be clear, death works differently in the animated world. Plenty of cartoons end with a character going to either heaven or hell, dressed in the appropriate costume. But no matter what happens to Daffy Duck or Yosemite Sam, they'll be back in the next cartoon just fine. It seems like dying is just a temporary setback. And so, when the weasels double over in laughter from Eddie's antics, a cartoon angel emerges from their bodies one by one. The only weasel not to receive an angel is Smartass, who gets kicked directly into the dip. This emphasizes just how permanent dipping really is. It's not clear if the weasels know that Doom's a Toon, but that shouldn't really matter. They're still helping someone kill all the other Toons and destroy their home. Presumably, after the deed was done, Doom would have kept them around since they've been relatively useful. Or maybe he'd kill them. Weasels are not exactly known for being trustworthy, and neither is Doom. The graphic novel I mentioned earlier has the final battle play out a little differently, with all 5 weasels getting permanently dipped. Smartass finds Eddie's antics so funny that he loses control of Doom's dip machine and sprays the other 4 weasels. When Doom gets flattened, it's confirmed that the weasels did know he was a Toon, at least in this version. Smartass does not react in surprise, and instead helps Doom reinflate himself. He ends up falling into the dip and dissolving right alongside his boss. Like the best villains, even if we root against the Toon Patrol, we can't help but feel a little sad when we see them go. As I've said in the past, I love when movies go the extra mile and make these potentially generic groups into individuals. The weasels may lack intelligence, driving skills, and basic morality, but boy do they have personality. Silvestri's theme for the weasels is a bit unusual. Not the theme itself, but how it's used. While it's strongly associated with the Toon Patrol, it also plays in scenes without them, like certain moments with Judge Doom and the Toontown chase. The Toon Patrol was meant to be a twisted parody of the 7 Dwarfs, but there are only 5 of them. If you know the history of Snow White, then you might be aware that Disney went through dozens of names for potential dwarfs. It's the same with the weasels. Other names considered included Sleazy, Scummy, Crazy, Twitchy, and Itchy. There were 2 other weasels that even made it to the concept art phase, which could have boosted the Toon Patrol up to a proper 7. One of them was Slimy, who was designed as a 50s greaser with a blackjack. The other was Flasher, a lustful weasel in a trench coat with a pair of groping hands. I understand why they didn't use him, but I kind of wish they did, if only for the sheer audacity. Before the weasels became distinctive characters, Doom had an additional henchman, a pet vulture named Voltaire. We can see him in a few pieces of concept art, and a toy that came out with the movie. Continuing the Snow White theme, his design is directly based on one of the vultures from that movie. Most of Voltaire's parts were eventually given to the Toon Patrol. He was supposed to help the weasels during the chase scene with Benny the Cab, and drop the bricks on Roger in the warehouse. Most notably, he would have been the one who got thrown in the dip while the weasels were laughing. Finally, Doom originally had a briefcase that he would use before he dipped the condemned Toons. Twice in the screenplay, it pops open to reveal 12 kangaroos. 12 more Joeys would emerge from their pouches with cards that spelled out, "You are guilty." With this kangaroo court concluded, Doom proceeds with the punishment. Roger Rabbit received 3 theatrical shorts following the success of his big movie. None of them had actual villains, unless we count Droopy's cameo, where he ties Jessica to a roller coaster track. The movie got a direct sequel in comic form. The Resurrection of Doom gives the titular villain a concrete identity and backstory. No one knew who Doom really was at the time of his demise, but it seems that forensics officers have identified a body, or what's left of it. Judge Doom was actually a famous Toon actor named Baron von Rotten. Rotten started work all the way back in 1921 in Kansas City, the same year and location as Walt Disney's first studio. Known as the Toon of 1,000 Faces, Von Rotten was the Lon Chaney of the cartoon world, playing a number of villains that didn't look anything like each other. One of them even looks like the earliest version of Peg-Leg Pete. After an accident filming a wartime short, he went mad. He didn't just act as the villains anymore, he fully embraced them, becoming just as evil as the characters he was portraying. As to what Von Rotten actually looked like, his true appearance is very close to Judge Doom, except animated. A trio of weasels, one of them strongly resembling the deleted character Flasher, decide to resurrect Doom. One of them refers to the Toon Patrol as his brothers, which could mean that the 5 weasels from the movie were siblings, but it could also be that all weasels consider themselves related. This is reason enough to want to avenge their fallen comrades. Restoring an old model sheet, the weasels use a multiplane camera to bring the judge back to life. It makes about as much sense as anything else in the series. I like that the story uses actual animation technology to resurrect the character, rather than just come up with a silly, nonsensical explanation. The newly restored Doom, of course, wants revenge. Surprisingly, he goes after Roger instead of Eddie Valiant. True, Roger played a sizable role in Doom's downfall, but he was ultimately a pawn, while Eddie uncovered the truth and actually killed Doom and his henchmen. Shortly after this, R.K. Maroon's identical twin brother C.B. Maroon takes over the cartoon studio. You'll remember that Doom killed R.K. in the movie. C.B. wants to continue his brother's legacy and keep making cartoons starring Roger. Unfortunately, he wants to take things in a different direction with stylized animation. Flat, unexpressive, and affordable. Try as he might, Roger can't conform to these restrictions. Not only does Roger find himself out of a job, but CB fires most of the other toons as well and auctions off the studio. Eddie gets on the case and finds that CB Maroon is really Judge Doom in disguise. Of course he is. After all, RK Maroon having an identical twin brother? What are the odds? Well, the biggest surprise is that there really is a CB Maroon that wanted to help the studio, but Doom's been keeping him prisoner in a warehouse for weeks. Not sure why he hasn't killed him at this point, but that's mostly a nitpick. Eddie, Roger, and the real CB expose Doom and squirt him with water guns. Water guns filled with dip. Doom and his weasels melt, and hopefully this time their model sheets are locked in a vault somewhere. There are some fun moments in the story, especially the scene where Roger tries and fails to do limited animation, but my big complaint is how they handle Judge Doom. Part of the reason this character works so well was because of the mystery surrounding him. What toon could be so twisted as to mastermind the destruction of his own kind? The mystery deepens when we don't even know what he looks like outside of those red eyes. Giving Doom an actual name, backstory, and appearance robs him of that. Plus, his real appearance just looks like a cartoon version of his human disguise. I understand that people associate that look with Judge Doom, but I think this was sort of a misfire. Was Judge Doom really the hunter from Bambi? Was he Pistol Packin' Possum? Was he, I don't know, Grampy? I didn't see him in the movie. It's fun to speculate, but I don't think I truly want to know the answer. Roger Rabbit received 2 comic book series after this. One of them, simply titled Roger Rabbit, focused on mystery solving. The other one, Roger Rabbit's Toontown, was more comedy-based. All the villains who appeared in these comics were one-shot characters, but it wasn't uncommon to see some weasels thrown into the mix. In addition to the generic henchman weasels, we have Weasel Diesel and his evil Hot Rod. These two compete in a race against Roger and Benny. Being a weasel, it's a given that he cheats. A smart-ass lookalike who works for an unscrupulous gossip columnist. Winnie, the only female weasel in the series, who lost a number of roles to Jessica. When she opens a beauty parlor, she plans on ruining her rival once and for all. In cartoon fashion, every one of her tricks backfires on her. The cover introduces her as Jessica's archenemy, but this was the penultimate issue, and Winnie made no further appearances. A group of weasels get a solo story where they open a school to teach others to be just as rotten as them. It's explained that cartoon weasels are devious creatures by nature and delight in playing the villain role. They even accept that they're destined to lose in the end. One of their lessons is on taking a proper beating. It's a grand weasel tradition. This definitely fits with everything else we've seen in this universe. The seemingly only exception is a weasel who moves in next door to Roger. After getting understandably worried, Roger vows to make a great first impression. Predictably, he bungles everything, and the weasel actually accuses him of being the problem. The two of them are able to patch things up, making this character the only nice weasel in the entire franchise. Being such a popular movie at the tail end of the 80s, it's not a surprise that Roger Rabbit was adapted into several video games during that period. The game for the NES is probably the one most people are familiar with. A lot of the game involves Eddie running around LA, followed loyally by Roger. On the overworld screen, the Toon Patrol's car will regularly drive around and needs to be avoided. Voltaire, the deleted Vulture character, will fly overhead and try to snatch Roger. On other screens, Voltaire will drop bombs on the player, and Psycho will occasionally need to be fought off. Sometimes, Smartass and Stupid will grab Roger, who needs to tell him a joke. The weasels will start laughing, allowing Roger and Eddie to make an escape. Stupid also plays a somewhat important role as the guard of the Acme warehouse. He's basically a brick wall, and will block your every attempt to get inside. The only way to get by him is to distract him with a baseball. Like I said, he's called Stupid for a reason. Judge Doom is naturally the final boss, and he won't go down without a fight. After a lengthy battle, Eddie manages to knock him unconscious and finishes him off with a dip. The Amiga Roger Rabbit game also retells the movie, but features Roger as the star, with Eddie nowhere to be seen. Some driving levels have Roger and Benny avoiding the Toon Patrol's truck. The final level, of course, takes place in the warehouse, where Roger has to fight the 5 weasels using the available cartoon weapons. Laughter is still the answer, and the weasels all croak like they did in the movie. This time, even Smartass gets his own angel. Below, we can see a teeny tiny Jessica slowly being approached by Judge Doom and his dip machine. Upon defeating the weasels, Roger is then able to dip Doom himself. Meanwhile, the Game Boy version is yet another movie retelling done in sort of a mock Legend of Zelda style. This time, Marvin Acme calls Roger directly to explain the situation with his will and the deed to Toontown. Just as he finishes, we see Doom's gun poke out from behind a curtain and shoot him, making it closer to what happened to R.K. Maroon in the movie. In fact, he looks more like the straight-laced Maroon as well, but we're talking about a movie tie-in for the Game Boy here. Roger goes to see Jessica next, but watches her get kidnapped by 2 of the weasels in plain sight. The plot is no longer about clearing Roger's name, but about retrieving the will and the deed from Judge Doom. Roger runs around, collecting clues and working with Eddie. He takes on each member of the Toon Patrol except Wheezy, who is totally absent. Maybe the censors didn't like his smoking. The final battle is not in the warehouse for a change, but instead Doom's mansion. The grounds are crawling with weasels, and a few barrel-throwing gorillas based on the one at the nightclub and Donkey Kong, I guess. The final game is The Outlier, released exclusively in Japan for the Famicom. This game was actually released in America starring a different rabbit, Bugs Bunny. If you watch my video on the Horned King, you'll be familiar with the confusing Crazy Castle franchise. The games themselves are straightforward. The main character runs around, dodging enemies in an arcade-like setup. The confusing part is how the games were released. Depending on the country you lived in, you could potentially play the exact same game, or one of its sequels, but starring anyone from Mickey Mouse to Garfield to the Ghostbusters. In the Roger Rabbit version, his enemies consist of the Weasels, Judge Doom, Penguin Waiters, and Bongo the Gorilla. I mentioned Bongo in the previous game. I don't really think he's a villain. There's a deleted scene where some have interpreted him as working for Doom, but he's really just doing his job as a bouncer. Eddie was sneaking around Jessica's dressing room and Bongo caught him. Although Doom acts uncharacteristically civil to Bongo in this scene, it's because the gorilla is unwittingly being useful to the judge by preventing Eddie's investigation. That's really the extent of things. Oh, and of course, the Mary Poppins penguins aren't villains either, but I don't think that needs much of an elaboration. Toontown at Disneyland was designed to look like a real-life version of the area seen in the movie. It really does feel like walking into a cartoon. One of the land's highlights is Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin. The attraction takes guests through the dark back alleys of Toontown, where the Toon Patrol is up to their old tricks. With Doom gone, they don't have any sort of legal authority anymore. Instead, they decide to spread as much dip around as possible, purely because that's what weasels do. The attraction's plot emerges organically as guests wind their way through the maze-like queue. It's a great example of environmental storytelling. When guests pass the Ink and Paint Club, they hear Jessica fretting backstage about the weasel's return. Nearby, Baby Herman listens to a radio announce that the weasels have been spotted with a truckload of dip. Finally, guests walk by the weasel's hideout, where they hear the villains plotting to kidnap Jessica to lure Roger into a trap. The hideout area is of special interest to fans of the Toon Patrol. Their original voice actors have returned, and get extended dialogue if you choose to stop and listen. We certainly have in the past. It's the best chance you have to hear Wheezy's voice clearly.
Don't worry, we'll just hit them all.
But, boss, Benny knows the streets of Toontown like the back of his tread.
Shut up, you dumbbell. There's lots of us and only one of him.
As the ride begins, guests immediately encounter Greasy, Wheezy, and Stupid pouring dip onto the road. This causes their cab to spin around wildly for the rest of their journey. Jessica is being truncated, as Smartass puts it, which means she's tied up in his trunk. Although the judge is not in the ride, the car's license plate still says Doom. As the trip continues, riders see Roger tangling with Psycho in an electric plant, getting a nasty shock. The chase eventually ends where else but the Acme warehouse. A 6th weasel, voiced by Will Ryan, menaces guests inside. I've seen fans refer to this character as Sleazy, but I don't think he has an official name.
Permit me to get the door for you, chump.
Further in the warehouse, Jessica has freed herself, giving Wheezy and Greasy a solid whack with a mallet. Stupid dangles from a rope nearby. Although Jessica is safe, the guests are still in danger. Smartass has Doom's old dip machine aimed straight at them and is pulling them closer with a magnet. Roger comes to the rescue, saving everyone with a portable hole leading back to the taxi dispatch. In 2021, the ride was updated to remove Jessica from the damsel role and make her a detective trying to stop the weasels. She is no longer in the trunk, which instead contains some barrels of dip. Now, she stands awkwardly positioned behind Smartass in a less revealing Dick Tracy-style overcoat. Other than the same wardrobe change near the end of the ride, everything else is exactly the same. I assume this was to give Jessica a more progressive role, but the fact that she still managed to save herself in the original version is already pretty empowering. Believe me, I could go on about this for a while, but it's only sort of relevant to the subject. So this is a last-minute edit. I got a helpful tip, very appropriately, from Mike's Toontown, that Judge Doom was also involved in the opening of Disneyland's Toontown. To celebrate, there was an event called Mickey's Toontown Welcome Blast. I'm not sure how many times this was performed, but here's a rundown. Roger is on hand with the Toontones, played by the Dapper Dans Quartet, who are doing a musical act. The festivities are cut short when they receive a dip time bomb, courtesy of Judge Doom. The Toontones even perform a singing telegram Doom sent, which means that the Wicked Judge actually had a villain song in a roundabout sort of way.
Just a spoonful of dip will illuminate each and every tune away. When this bomb explodes, then I will celebrate a dippity-doo-da-day.
With the help of several tunes and a child from the audience, the bomb is deactivated before any harm can be done. Apparently, an episode of Bozo Circus had the world's most famous clown disarm the bomb. Judge Doom himself never appears in the show. That would come later. While I'm unhappy with the changes to the cartoon spin, I'm actually pretty impressed by something else Disneyland did recently. Judge Doom appeared, live and in person, for Halloween in 2023. Although guests couldn't meet him traditionally, he would perform for them, demonstrating his dip. And how did he do this? With that poor little cartoon shoe. Bravo for having the cojones to recreate one of the movie's most traumatic scenes in Disneyland. During his little demonstration, Doom would explain that he's looking for a certain rabbit. I assume the judge didn't find him, so hopefully he'll continue his search for many Halloweens to come. Although we've seen sequels in the forms of comics and theme park attractions, Roger Rabbit would never have a proper film sequel. Several prequels were planned, however, 2 of which have had their screenplays leak online. Toon Platoon is the better-known one. The story follows Roger as he journeys to Hollywood to find his long-lost mother. He meets Richie, an aspiring actor, and Wendy, who works at the radio station, along with her co-worker and roommate, Jessica. Roger falls in love with Jessica and bungles his way into show business, just as America enters World War II. The titular Toon Platoon has been formed with the logic that if cartoons are indestructible, they'd make the perfect soldiers. Unfortunately for the Army, really hurting someone is against the toon's nature. Our main villain is Otto Green, a German agent posing as an American radio producer. Leading up to the war, he's been putting subtle and not-so-subtle propaganda into his programs, urging America to stay out of others' affairs. Once the States gets involved in the war, he drops the act and kidnaps Jessica and Wendy to Germany. Jessica is forced to become a Tokyo Rose figure named Axis Annie, sending demoralizing messages to the troops. The only animated villains are a pack of Toon Panthers kept by the Nazis. 2 of them are named Bambi and Thumper, with Otto confessing he loved that movie. A pair of villainesses in the James Bond movie Diamonds Are Forever were also named after these Disney characters, which may or may not be a coincidence. Unlike most of the Toons, the Panthers are totally humorless, speechless wild beasts. It's hard to tell how much personality would have been injected in them if the film had been made just by reading the screenplay. The movie was turned down for a couple reasons. For one thing, after directing Schindler's List, Spielberg didn't really want to be associated with a light-hearted World War II movie. I wouldn't be surprised if he remembered the dismal performance of his own 1941. The more practical reason was that given the scope of the screenplay, the whole thing would have been far too expensive. The same screenwriters wrote a new script called Who Discovered Roger Rabbit. Roger still sets off to Hollywood to find his mother, but aside from a few scenes playing out the same as Toon Platoon, the plot is totally different. This time, our villain is a human named Emil Spinoza. We meet him in the office of agent Sid Savage, who's auditioning tunes for a review Spinoza is producing. Actually, Spinoza isn't really a producer. He's a back-alley surgeon, and he has something different in mind for our animated friends. Although his evil plan does not have the scale of Judge Doom's, it's possibly even more twisted. 3 words. Cartoon organ harvesting. Spinoza uses the Toon's indestructible body parts to fix injuries of human clients. His biggest offer comes from Vilma St. Clair, a gorgeous silent movie star who has a terrible voice. Like so many others, the transition from silent to sound films ruined her career, and she wants Spinoza to give her Jessica's voice. Another client is Joseph DeMarco, a gangster who repeatedly goes against Roger and friends. After his ensuing injuries, he is given a Toon hand, a Toon foot, and by the end of the movie, an entire Toon body. This one is of a cartoon turtle with a shell full of weapons. During the final battle, DeMarco attacks Savage with all he's got. Savage ends up coming out on top because DeMarco is now more Toon than human. This means he's inherited Toon morality, so he can't actually kill anyone. Before we conclude our Toontown spin-around, I've received a few comments in the past asking if I was going to talk about Toontown Online. The game was very popular when it came out, and still has a devoted fanbase. Now, I never experienced it firsthand. Aside from seeing the commercials constantly, Disney put a lot of money to this campaign, but I'll do my best to cover the cogs. According to the game's backstory, the cogs were accidentally created when Scrooge McDuck activated a robot in Gyro Gearloose's lab, despite the sign warning him not to. The robot then created a metallic army of evil business bots. Apparently, Disney decided that they didn't like this backstory and changed it so the cogs just showed up one day to ruin everything. This could explain why the Scrooge plot was never resolved. The first robot kidnaps Scrooge at the end of the introduction, and the world's richest duck seemingly vanishes for good. One of the developers said there was an actual ending planned, but it didn't really work for what was meant to be an endless game. The cogs are anti-toons, joyless drones obsessed with business. They are all named after business roles, terms, and concepts. Pencil pushers, loan sharks, ambulance chasers. The dev team had a fun time coming up with different enemies. The Toons won't take this one lying down. Using the thing they're best at, humor, they arm themselves with gags and jokes and face the robots head on. Laughter simply does not compute with the cog, so if it does find the Toons funny enough, its head explodes. The cogs have set up a permanent residency in Toontown with their own oppressive headquarters. The Toons could presumably find some way to live in peace with the cogs if the robots didn't keep harassing them. Their ultimate goal is to make Toontown as dull, gray, and workaholic as them. The battle lines are drawn, and the war continues to rage on. Even though Toontown Online officially ended after 10 years, several fan servers keep things going. Somewhere in cyberspace, a robot businessman's head is blowing up after experiencing the gift of laughter, which, to some people, is exactly how things should be. Although the cogs never appeared at the theme parks, there were actually walk-around versions created. In addition to appearing at E3 to promote the game, the costumes were used in a series of commercials. Toontown Online was not directly related to Roger Rabbit, but you can see the connection, and not just because of the location. The idea of using laughter to prevail against a seemingly unstoppable foe is a powerful one. I think that core value is what really makes Who Framed Roger Rabbit a truly great movie. The jaw-dropping visuals and quick-paced humor are quite strong, but at its core, the film is about a broken man learning to smile again. Our next entry will take place in an area significantly less cheerful than Toontown, New York in the 80s. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.